Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you. Now, as I said, we'll have 2 sessions or 2 exercises, and one is actually completely dedicated on HAZOP. So I'll be giving out an example, and everybody will be doing a HAZOP at least for the 2 keywords, maybe temperature, flow, high, low.
There are keywords.
Yeah, keywords
Guide words.
and guide words. So we will have one exercise, 1.5 hour fully dedicated for HAZOP and cell analysis, low power and all those things. So you will see. But thank you once again to touch upon those things. So let's start with some dirty stuff. You know, we all say industrialization had many side effects, and nowadays it's not so nice and this and that. But there are many positives of industrialization. So here you could see, I just mentioned one here, the life expectancy went from 30 years, 1850 to almost 65, 70 years nowadays. I think in your generation you cannot think about it. It's reality. People were dying at 30 or 35. So advances in medical field and other fields has led to let's say increase in the life expectancy every day, almost every day. You could notice a small dip here. This is not working. But you could notice a small dip here. And this one is COVID. So this graph was increasing, and probably this one was the, I don't know, another epidemic. But that's the one called the COVID. A real, visible dip. As I said, thanks to the advancement in medical field, there's no big epidemic over the last 30-40 years. Keep aside the COVID we're talking about. When I was studying like you guys in undergraduate, in the psychometry course, I still remember I always do calculations, 79% nitrogen, 21% oxygen, but sometimes you also have CO2 to take into account. And I always had in my mind 300, 350 ppm. So 0.03 mole fraction, mole percent, sorry. That's the concentration of CO2 in the air. And then I started working in projects, never had to do these calculations, using softwares and everything. And suddenly 3-4 years ago, I was doing some calculation and I found some mistake. And went on the internet, and I was shocked to see that now the concentration is not 360, it's almost 420. So just to mention, you miss this 15 years and suddenly see the concentration has gone up from 360 to 420. So thanks to internet, I realized why the calculations were not correct. Then I did a small calculation, a small that you guys can also do. That's the diameter of Earth. And I just did a small calculation. We have the atmosphere up to 10 kilometers, about so thin that you can ignore. And going from 360 to 420, if I calculate back to a simple mathematics, the volume of the sphere with the diameter of Earth plus the height of the atmosphere, I ended up with 612 billion tons of CO2 we have released, human society has released over the last, I don't know, 25-30 years. And coincidentally, my calculation were very close to the number I found on internet. 617 billion tons of CO2 we have released. So, I mean, it depends also on the source of the internet which you found, but more or less this is the range. Almost 600 billion tons of CO2 human society has released over the last 25-30 years. If you want to have feeling of the number, I don't know if somebody has visited a quarry or a cement plant. I cannot put up a picture, but recently I was in a quarry where you mine the limestone. So most of the time cement plant is just beside where the source of the limestone is. And so it was, I think, 300 meter by 200 meter and 90 meter deep. So it's a huge hole, almost 10 football field or even more, and can be fitted as for the area, and 90 meter deep. And if you know limestone is CaCO3, and limestone is CaCO3. And you also know the molecular weight of CaCO3? 100, right? Kg per kilomole. And out of this 100, how much is CO2? 40? 44. So, somebody told me that whatever you see here is big for 300 meter by 100 meter by 90 meter. Half of this is released to atmosphere. That already shows you, and that was in solid state, now it's in gaseous state. You could imagine the scale of operation, how much CO2 we have. But what's the problem with the CO2? So here you could see the CO2 concentration increasing, at the same time the pH of the ocean, all the oceans are decreasing, so it's getting acidic. Ocean water is getting more and more acidic. Because if you have more CO2 in the atmosphere, you will have more CO2 in your water or the oceans. So once again, what's the problem with the CO2? It will increase, it's more CO2. But what has happened is, because of the CO2 release, the global temperature is rising. And here you could see how this is increasing over the years, in the last 1 or 2 century. And this graph is actually in parallel to the industrialization what we had over the last 200 years. So there are two group of school of thoughts. There are two, let's say, group of people. One is directly blaming CO2 for this temperature increase. There is also another group of people or experts out there saying that it's a natural cause. So if we see, I do not have this plot here, but if we go prehistoric age, maybe 10,000 years, 20,000 years, there is a temperature increase, then decrease. Some people are saying, let's not worry about that CO2 is responsible for this temperature increase. This is a natural cause. Some religion says famine or some other word. So this is a natural cycle. It will go up, temperature will go up. But for now, for this scope of this course, let's assume or let's agree to this global consensus that this temperature rise is direct result of CO2 human society has released over the last 200 years. So consequences, what's happening with this temperature rise? As I said, we are experiencing extreme weathers, severe storms, rising sea levels, ocean pH I already mentioned, those are things. Severe health issues, food insecurity, because food production is going down because of this temperature rise. A lot of economic damage, and because of this, the most vulnerable in the society are elderly and young people, and also the unprivileged poor people. Now, how this CO2 concentration increase and temperature rise is correlated. So a little bit of, let's say, technical part is a term called greenhouse effect. Does somebody know about this? Somebody explain? It's on the slide, but I want you also to come up with some technique. So probably you see already here on the slide. That's the solar radiation what we get. This is something what Earth absorbs. And these greenhouse gases, CO2 is one of these gases. They do not allow the re-radiation of this heat coming from sun back to the upper atmosphere. And that's the problem. If these greenhouse gases keep this heat here in the atmosphere, the lower atmosphere, the global temperature will rise. So that's basically the greenhouse effect we have. As I said, heat accumulation. So heat is coming. So first law, to the balance, what heat comes in goes out. You have your equilibrium state. But as long as you are disturbing this in and out balance, you will have accumulation. Now, as I said, the CO2 is one of those greenhouse gases. Others are methane, N2O. I don't know if you have heard about N2O also. NOx? Yes. So basically N2O is not as such released from combustion. So if you are burning something, using air, and burning or combustion means you could have temperature 1800, 1900 degrees. For example, if you are burning methane, here you can have a temperature of 1900 degrees. At 2000 degrees, the nitrogen in air will also react with oxygen to produce nitrogen. So it will not stay as inert. So normally we always learn in our undergraduate course nitrogen is an inert gas. So what comes in goes out. But in reality, a very small fraction of nitrogen also reacts with oxygen and generates these NOx. At the flame or the combustion, during the combustion, the NOx which is generated is NO and NO2. It's not N2O. If you have combustion at low temperature, you can also have N2O. But once these NO and NO2 are released in the atmosphere, they disperse and then in presence of particulate matters, they convert from NO to N2O. So NO and NO, so probably you have heard that NOx is also a big trouble nowadays. These are engines, I don't know if you are aware, they inject ammonia or urea to reduce NOx. So NOx in itself is not an issue, but this NOx released to atmosphere and converting to N2O, that's an issue. Now, as I said, there are many gases, but they all are not so, should I say, culprit, bad. So GWP, that's the global warming potential. That's a way to quantify their effect, the greenhouse effect. Right. And this is always reported based on CO2 as reference. So the global warming potential for CO2 is 1. And for other gases, as the number is higher, so GWP is higher, effect is higher, lower number shows the effect is lower. So I don't know if you know methane, very innocent gas, but that's 23 times more global warming potential compared to CO2. So if we are releasing 1 mole of CO2, so if we are releasing, or let's say if we are releasing 1 mole of methane, and we are releasing, it's equivalent to release of 23 moles of CO2. But fortunately, the amount of CO2 released is much higher than the amount of CH4 which is released. Normally we don't intentionally release CH4, but whenever you do natural gas exploration, it's a lot of leakage. CH4 is due to leakage. And I was astonished to know, I didn't know earlier, I was astonished to know that over the pipelines, almost 3% of gas for to transport is lost. So, although everybody talks about CO2, but as long as the society is dependent on natural gas or methane greenhouse problem is also a severe one. It's not addressed so much, but it's also a severe one. We saw 620 billion tons of CO2 over the last 25 years, something like 30 billion tons every year. compared to CO2 and 2O, what NOx would be not even million, factor 10 to the power 4. But the global warming potential of N2O is 296, almost 300. It's 300 times more, let's say, severe than CO2 is. Then we have some hydrofluorocarbons. I don't know, I think in India also they are banned. Most of those are already banned. 40 years ago they were considered very good components because of their insulating properties. A lot of those things were used in refrigeration, insulation, etc. But in Western countries it's almost banned. In India also, as far as I remember, most of those are already banned. So here we come to the first calculation. So here you could see I'm presenting here two composition of coal. It's almost 35% carbon. I remember it was an ultimate analysis, approximate analysis. I remember the coal. That's the ultimate analysis of the coal. It's almost 35%. Let's take an example of the second one. It's 34% coal. And if you remember from your stoichiometric classes, calculate back how much CO2 is released from 1 kg of coal and how much heat will be released from 1 kg of coal. And probably you could see 0.36 here. Can somebody tell what this 0.36 should be or could be? So we started with the basic 1 kg of coal. Sorry?
Efficiency.
Very good. Thank you. Efficiency. Efficiency of energy to power. So that's a typical efficiency of a coal-based power plant. It can be 1 or 2% here and there, but let's take for the simplicity 0.36. So we started with 1 kg of coal. It's almost 345 grams of carbon, 44 and 12, I don't need to say. The molecular weight of CO2 and the molecular weight of elemental carbon. And the last row shows the calorific value or the heating value of this coal. It's almost 3,300 kilocalorie per kg. That gives us 4.2 conversion of calorie to joule. I don't need to mention. So useful energy 5 megajoule. With this we could establish a number how much CO2 we release from kilowatt hour of electricity produced if we are using this coal, this grade coal in a power plant, right, with the efficiency of 26%, 960. Madam, do you agree with the number, or you have something else in mind for a coal-based power plant from the GAG reporting?
It's okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So keep this number in mind. It's almost 900 grams or 900 kg of CO2 per megawatt hour of energy or useful energy. Similarly, let's take an example of natural gas. So natural gas is most of the time about 95% methane, many hydrocarbons, and also CO2. Sometimes natural gas, it depends on the source of the natural gas. Sometimes gas will a lot of CO2 also associated with natural gas, and you have to remove it. But typically this is the pipeline what we have in most of the country, also in India. That's the typical composition. So if we do the similar calculation here, you could see 0.962% is methane. That means 44 divided by 17. And I just put 1.05 here for sake of simplicity because we don't have methane. We also have methane. You could see 1.74%. So ideally, you would have done the calculation based on 96 times 44 divided by 17. plus 1.74 times 44 divided. What's the multiplier rate of gain? Sorry? 16 is became 30. C2 has 630. So ideally we would do the calculation based on each component, but for sake of simplicity, we put a number 1.05 because the gain is also less than 2%. Now look at the heat release, it's 44.5 megajoule. So useful energy is 20 megajoule. And the CO2 intensity would be around 470 grams per kilowatt hour of power produced. We saw in the last slide we used 0.36, and in this slide we use 0.45. Because the efficiency of a natural gas based power plant is higher. A lot of losses with coal as fuel, but natural gas or energy you can use more efficiently. It's a little bit higher in the efficiency. But that's not really making the difference from 900 to 470. That's not the efficiency. Yes, efficiency is helping, but you could say it's 470 grams per kilowatt. So you can already say going from coal to natural gas is reducing the CO2 intensity. So if you use 1 kilowatt hour of coal, you are using 910, or remember how much? 910. And if I replace coal to natural gas, I already reduced, producing same amount of power, I already reduced my CO2 emission by almost 50%. So there are a lot of fuels, not only coal, natural gas, but there are many other fuels. Industry, we use oil, we use diesel, fuel oil, heavy cuts from petroleum. I'll not go into detail for hydrogen now, but just to show the comparison, you could see here, coal is 910, we go to natural gas, it's 470, and the fuel oil, the heavy distillate from petroleum, diesel, they lie somewhere in between coal and natural gas. And natural gas is heavy, it's more carbon, heavy carbon. And just to show the comparison between natural gas and methane, methane is even lower. And if you burn hydrogen, then there is no carbon release. So please consider a small blue thing as zero. What it means, as you go from coal is like no hydrogen, here. So the C to H ratio, as you reduce your C to H ratio in your fuel, you will reduce your CO2 intensity. That's what I wanted to show here. So fuel oil, diesel, so molecular weight we're talking about maybe 70, 80, so even higher. So we saw over the last 25 years we went up from 360 to 420. Now let's consider 3 scenarios. Please forgive me for this mess up here. Something coming up later. But if you continue the business as usual, very soon we will go to 480. So 50% emission reduction will give us 425 in the next couple of years. But we want to go back to this temperature increase level to 1.C. It's very difficult. You cannot suddenly tell people stop using your bike and scooter and start coming to bicycle. You can say, you can motivate them, and you can convince them to do that in Unity Temple. Ask them to use bicycle to the station. Business will continue. That's for sure. So, to come back to this 1.5 degree scenario. So IPCC, if I'm not wrong, maybe Dr. Rajman correct me, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It's an apex body. All the countries have come together, discussed this issue, and they have set out some plans how we can go address this problem. So they have pledged that they will go net zero by 2050. That means they means the Western countries. There is also a political angle in this one. So who has created the mess with the most responsibility to clean it up? So they have to lead it from front. They have to take more responsibility, and they have to do the majority of cleaning up. So they have pledged that they will go net zero, means they will go from coal up to the hydrogen. So not really hydrogen, but to the zero carbon energy sources. With this it will be net zero for them by 2050. Although India is not responsible for the 620, out of the 620, we were responsible for less than one. Very small amount in terms of absolute number, but also in terms of per capita. Because we have a huge population, but still very less CO2 emitted. But to my happiness, to everybody's happiness, and all should be proud of this, India is marching ahead, not very far behind the Western countries. So we have pledged by 2070 we will also go net zero. So what we just saw, this small calculation, this is all CO2 intensity. This is also sometimes called as CO2 footprint. So what's the footprint? Exactly it's coming from. What's the amount of CO2 you are releasing? That's also called CO2 intensity, also the CO2 footprint. And just go on internet and see some plots here and there. You will see in today's world, the more CO2 footprint a country has or a society has, the more prosperous they are. So it's kind of somehow it's related, connected to sign of prosperity. The more energy you are using, the more rich you are. Somehow it's also true. So if you compare what we use here in India is maybe 10 times more than what people use in Western world. They are using 10 times more energy than us. The Western world, they are even talking about, even if we do go 2050 net zero, or let's say everybody by 2070 net zero, will not reverse the damage which has already been done. So to reverse the damage or to reduce the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere, we need to remove the CO2 from the atmosphere and put it back somewhere. So we're talking about negative emissions. So at the moment we have positive emissions, almost 20 billion per ton to the atmosphere. But beyond 2050, they are already talking about negative emissions. Yes, they will start not only they will stop emitting CO2, but they will also start capturing CO2 from atmosphere, thereby reducing the CO2 concentration in atmosphere. So that's the path society want to follow by 2040, 50 net zero, and after this even negative emission. And some of the let's say methods of afforestation. So that's why everybody is talking about going net zero, or let's say using carbon-free energy sources and aggressively doing afforestation. So here you could see the CO2 emission of some of the countries I was already mentioning. Let's see where do we stand, 1.8, and where all these Western countries stands, 15, something like this, so almost 7-8 times. So that's the country perspective, but there's also a developed perspective. Here you could see that's the UK. Economy is going down, so energy consumption is going down. It's a little bit less. Here you could see the China, sudden increase. Sorry, you want to say something? Oh, sorry. Thanks for reminding. Sorry. So we are talking about, just to repeat on this slide, I will not go back, but just on this slide. Here you could see India 1.8 and all these Western countries somewhere around 15. So as we were discussing earlier, almost 8, 9, 10 times more energy intensive than us. So that's the country perspective, and this one is the plot showing this developing nations perspective. You could see UK coming down because last 5-10 years the economy is not doing so well, energy consumption is going down. Probably that's the United States, more or less stable, now going down because, so difference between this one and this one is, that's the consequence of their economy not performing well. That's the consequence of a lot of efforts the Americans have put in to reduce their CO2 emissions. So their graph is going down. And look at China, the China growth story everybody is familiar about. Suddenly from 2000, they almost reached the UK level, the Western level. And look at we humble Indians, somewhere here. But we also have our own growth story, so we are also going up, but not at that pace. Now imagine China was here 20 years back. There was not so much talk about CO2 emissions, that we have to reduce the CO2 emission. And they were allowed to grow like this. Nobody put any pressure or any limit on them. And they release suddenly so much CO2. If you take this period and this period, their CO2 emissions is similar. So what they did in last 20 years, they did in last 100 years. So unchecked, uncapped, they were allowed to grow. And now suddenly we are on our growth story and people are telling us, please don't release CO2. So these two things are linked. So there's also a political, we'll try to stay on the technical parts, being engineer, but I just wanted to show there is also a political aspect of these things. So the debate of developing nation, you develop based on, let's say, on this CO2 emitted, and now it's time for us, and you guys are telling us don't emit CO2. So I think similar graph you could see on this side, you could see the population, just to give you perspective. China, highly populated, India, similar population. And that's the CO2 per person emitted. And it's already also written here, so if you multiply this by this, then you know. And graphically to show that the best way would be the area. Visibly you could see at the moment most of the CO2 is coming from this guy. And this guy, we are also top 5 nowadays. Similarly, on this plot also you could see the per capita income, because this prosperity and per capita income and the CO2 emission, energy use, all these things are related, correlated. So developed society, the rich societies, somewhere here, they are on the higher side. So there is a trend. So less privilege, with the less GDP, they are also emitting less. So more you have, more you will spend, and most of the time you spend in dirty stuff, which emits CO2. So that's, we talk about the absolute CO2 emissions, right? Country-wise, we also saw the India perspective. And this one is showing where exactly the CO2 is coming from. So 20 billion or 25 billion tons CO2 per year, it's a huge number. Billion is 10 to the power 6 and ton is 1000 kg. So you could imagine, it's a huge number. Where exactly it's coming from? So majority is from power industry, and other industrial combustions. So we saw Haber-Bosch process. That's one. transportation. So within the transportation, it's also not just the private vehicles, but the air industry, the airlines. And can you imagine what would be the biggest contributor within the transportation? Which other transportation mode has very high CO2 emission? Sorry? Cargo ships, marine industry. Yeah, very good. Thanks. So building is not a let's say significant number for us, but it's a big number for Western world because the climate is very cold, and you have to supply a lot of domestic heating. So that's the world perspective, and here we see the India perspective. So here also we have most of our similar thing. Most is for the electricity power production, other industrial combustion, and you already see that buildings is a smaller fraction for us in India. Transportation, although we have already, let's say, decommissioned the bullock carts, but our society is not so, let's say, intensive on private vehicles. So the number of cars per person, per capita is still much lower compared to the Western world. We still do not travel so much in plane, we do not use so much. We do not have any waterways, so no shipping industry, no marine CO2 emission. That's why our transportation contribution is also much lower. And there are some other sectors such as cement. So what we'll do in next 1 hour or so, if time allows for the lunch, we'll be looking at each sector one by one, and not to spend 2 days or 3 days only on all the sectors. We'll limit ourselves only on the power industry, industrial combustion. Probably we'll talk about a few minutes on transportation as well. But majority will stay on the power industry and other industrial combustion. So where exactly all this electricity is coming at the moment? So here you could see I tried to put everything on one slide, so world perspective and Indian perspective. As expected, we are more coal based because we have a lot of coal resources. Western world, this one is for the whole world, the global, but a combination of developing economies and developed economies. They've already started to move away from the coal. So here you could see the coal fraction is almost 38% compared to almost 60% what we have. You could also see the difference in renewables. In many countries, they also started earlier. They also had money to invest. We'll see in coming slides, going green is not cheap. It costs a lot of money. So they had the money, so they could invest more on renewables earlier. Our fraction is still low, but as on the hydrogen mission, on the renewable also, I must say we must be proud of what we have achieved in last 10 years or 15 years. India is the only country which has revised their targets. So countries, the government, they set their targets. So how much electricity we will replace from fossils to renewable. And proudly saying we have always revised our targets on the positive sides. So for example, I don't remember exactly the numbers, but for 2022 targets, they were achieved already in 2019. And 2030 targets were set at 5 times higher than what they were set earlier. So it's something really to be proud about. So we are not far behind the Western world. So I think coming back, business as usual will go up to 480 ppm. We need to reduce it, and beyond 2050, we also have to go to let's say negative emissions. So what's the need of the day? We already know we have to increase the share of these sources. and we have to reduce all these dirty fuels which are emitting a lot of CO2. So now enough of political and graphs and this. Let's work on, as engineer, let's work on some technical solutions. So typically that's how you do. You burn your fossil fuels. You use this energy for electricity production, consumption, transportation, or industrial use, and then you release the CO2 to atmosphere. So how we can reduce CO2 coming out from this box going to the atmosphere? So the first way is to reduce its uses. That could be by two ways. As I was saying earlier, by saying, okay, I'll not use my bike from today, so I'm not using any fuel, I reduce it to zero. But we all know that's not possible. So one way of reducing it is by increasing efficiency. So when this topic started on the World Forum, initial couple of years, the focus was mainly on increasing the efficiency. So nobody was talking about efficiencies in the plant before maybe 1990, 1995 or so. There was one period in 1970 in US. There was this oil embargo from the Middle Eastern countries, and suddenly they realized actually what happened after the World War. Everybody went to a peace mode, means we are not going to fight anymore. We'll live peacefully. And suddenly they found a lot of energy, a lot of oil and gas and everything in Middle East. And they started enjoying this. So focus was absolutely not on efficiency. So if you have a car engine running, it's running. It was absolutely normal. Leave your car engine running. In Scandinavian countries, probably you know, but maybe not now, where you have temperatures like -20 or even lower. 20, 30 years back, they told me it was absolutely normal to leave your car on for the whole night, because next morning it will not start, and nobody was caring about how much fuel they will burn. They just leave it on. Nobody was worried about CO2 and other emissions. But you cannot think about those things now. So increase efficiency. So they came up with the idea to keep their engines warm by using electric batteries. So innovation came up because of the need. And as I was saying, in 1970 the first need came when the oil embargo from Middle Eastern countries really put Western world under pressure. There were long queues. If you go to the YouTube, you will see 1970s there were long queues on the petrol station. That was really unheard for Western people. So yes, once again, increasing efficiency, that was the focus in the early years, but still continues to be so in developing countries like India and China. So wherever you can increase the efficiency, you could reduce CO2 emission for the same energy output. The next one would be replace it. We already saw in earlier slides, if we go from coal-based power production to natural gas-based power production, we already reduce CO2 emission by 50%. So the next step would be replace it. And if we move even further from natural gas, and if we use hydrogen, it's like zero carbon, so carbon-free, so low carbon to carbon-free energy sources. But as I said earlier, this going green or going from coal to natural gas is expensive. Similarly, from natural gas to hydrogen, it's even more expensive. Some people from hydrogen business, they know the cost difference between hydrogen and other fuels, so it's not cheap. So intermittent solution could also be, what else you can do? You continue your business as usual, increase the efficiency as much as possible, go to low carbon fuels, practically or economically possible as much, and whatever CO2 is coming out, you capture this and don't let it go to the atmosphere, but you sequester it. So by sequestration, I mean You can have your CO2 fixed permanently somewhere in the geological structures, formations. One way is enhanced oil recovery, probably you have already heard about. So when you recover oil from oil wells, so slowly the pressure reduces in this well, and at one point it's not economical anymore to release or remove this oil. So normally pressure is high in these oil wells, and you simply tap it, open the valve, or crude oil is coming out. But as time goes, you remove a lot of oil from it, pressure goes down in this reservoir, and you have very less oil coming in. And at one point, it's so expensive to remove it that you cannot have, there is no business case. So you just leave it. But still there is some oil there. So what people were doing 10 years ago, they capture CO2, pressurize it, and put it in this oil, and let the oil come out. So you enhance the recovery of oil. So oil wells which people earlier suspended or left alone, they came back with this CO2, high pressure CO2, put it in these wells, and then remove oil. So you have solved two problems. One is fix the CO2, and that also pays off by having some additional oil. But the debate is the amount of CO2 you fix in this oil, similar amount of CO2 in form of crude oil you are removing again. So that's not the permanent solution. It's just an intermediate solution. Enhancing from going from coal to hydrogen. Somehow it must be economically supported. So that's one way you capture CO2. What I want to say, you continue your business as best possible, with the best efficiency, with the best possible, economically possible, low carbon fuels like natural gas. Whatever CO2 still comes out, you take it and sequester it somewhere. So enhanced oil recovery is one example, but there are other ways. There are geological formation where you do not have any oil or anything coming out, you just put it there. So that's one way, sequestration. Sorry. Another way is to have the CO2, instead of sequestering it somewhere, you can use it in industrial processes somewhere and produce products. So one example of this, or maybe I'll let you tell me any example of CO2 use in industry. Industrial use of CO2 application. Remember anything?
Beverages.
Sorry?
Beverages.
Beverages. I was about to say everybody in this room is drinking Coca-Cola, but nobody is saying beverages. Yes, yes. Nowadays CO2 is also used industrially as refrigerant, replacing ammonia because of safety. So although the GWP is higher for CO2, it's a greenhouse gas, but as a refrigerant is much better than ammonia. So traditionally we always had ammonia as refrigerant used in industry, but because of the safety aspects and other issues, CO2 is replacing ammonia. But market is not so much. So amount of CO2, 20 billion tons, 30 billion tons annually would be released. The refrigerant market would be not even 10,000 tons a year. So it's a very small one. But वो कहते हैं ना बूंद बूंद करके घड़ा भरता है. So everything counts. Every step helps. So that's one way. Either you capture all the CO2 and sequester it somewhere, or you put it back. But the bad thing about this route is ultimately you are again releasing the CO2 back to the atmosphere. Recently, traditionally methanol is used for and traditionally it is produced via natural gas. Last 5 years people started talking about we cannot directly go from low carbon or coal and oil and this to hydrogen, so we'll continue with natural gas. It's not as clean as hydrogen, but it's also not as dirty as coal. So we'll continue with methane, and whatever CO2 comes out, we'll take it, and then we'll have hydrogen. We'll see in coming slides, but this captured CO2 will be combined with hydrogen, but this hydrogen will be the renewable hydrogen from electrolyzer, and methanol is produced. But coming back to this, the drawback of this step is, or this route is, you produce methanol from maybe green hydrogen and CO2, but somewhere this methanol is used, and wherever you use it, your CO2 is again released. So we'll see the policy aspects in coming slides, but governments and regulators, they also understand you cannot have a knee-jerk change, disruptive change. You cannot tell industry that please stop using coal and natural gas, everything now it's only renewable power and only hydrogen you have to use. So they want to have this transition slowly. When we say slowly means 10-15 years. So in regulatory terms, this route is still allowed, but only for next 10 years or so. By 2040, companies, I won't say not allowed, but they will not be encouraged to use this route of this utilization, because ultimately, once again, CO2 will be released, so it's not a permanent solution. So I think this we already covered up in the last slide. Okay, on the combustion side, there could be two ways, post-combustion and pre-combustion. So you let the business run as usual, and you just bring a tail end unit on your flue gas stack. So for an example, for the power production, you burn coal, you produce your electricity via the steam cycle or gas turbine, whatever, and finally your flue gas coming to the stack. Instead of sending it to a stack, you send it to a capture unit, and you capture the CO2 and send it to the storage side, which could be enhanced oil recovery or depleted gas well or any other geological formations. Or you go to the CCU route, utilization. But there could also be some pre-combustion techniques or technologies. So one is oxy-combustion. For example, when we burn fuel or coal, in this case using air, we also have a lot of nitrogen coming in. So one aspect of or drawback of nitrogen we just discussed a few minutes ago is this NOx. But another one is this nitrogen is inert and just flowing from point A to point B doing nothing. But while going out to the atmosphere, it's taking a lot of energy with. So you could increase your combustion efficiency drastically by replacing air with oxygen. So relating what I said earlier, going green is not clean. Producing oxygen from air will also cost you something. So you will have few percent of increase in efficiency, but oxygen cost is significant. So producing oxygen from air will cost a lot. So that's wanted to relate once again. Going or getting clean or reducing CO2 emission is not cheap. It will always cost you something, because there is no off-taker of CO2. There is nobody who will say, I'll buy your CO2. Or you treat your fuel. So what people are also doing, they take the natural gas and before combustion, they do some treatment and increase the CH ratio. So they reduce the carbon content, overall carbon content of the fuel. So that's another way. So pre-combustion, post-combustion, that's the basic difference is you let your business run as usual, like in power plant, and whatever flue gas you normally send to stack, you take it and put a tail end solution. And pre-combustion is before combusting your fuel, you do some treatment, you do some tricks so that you have less CO2. So that's also very common terms. Just wanted to make you familiar. So I think we repeated it 3-4 times. Getting better is expensive. It's always normal. So similar composition of natural gas, what we used few minutes ago. similar calculation will give me the electricity price of. Hello, it's working. Yeah, now it's working. So similar calculation gives me a power price of 170 euro per megawatt hour. So if I continue with natural gas, I'm producing at 95. And if people are telling me you are doing bad things, you are emitting a lot of CO2, please stop it, use solar panels. My production price is 174. So difference is 79 euro. Yeah, 79 euro per megawatt hour. Right. We'll come to this. Who's going to pay this 79 euro? So just to be nice, end of the day, everything turns around money. Yeah? Right? So we'll see in coming days how government is promoting industries, how this 79 euro is being offsetted. But let's limit our discussion on CO2 cost. So we already saw for this natural gas it's 470. For this it's 0 because we are not using any carbon, any fuel which has carbon or which results into any CO2 emission. So going from this to this, we avoided 470 kg of CO2, but we have to pay 79 euro. So that's my CO2 cost or CO2 avoidance cost, somewhere around 167 euro per ton. Actually, these numbers are based on assumptions. So if you go somewhere, the numbers will be a little bit different here and there. But idea here is to give you the feeling how these calculations are done and what's the order of magnitude we are talking about. So somewhere around 170 euro per ton will cost going from dirty to clean. Okay, so if as a power plant operator, if nobody is going to pay this 79 euro, I'll simply transfer this cost to my consumers. So I'll start selling the electricity at much higher rate, and at the end of the day, consumers are we all. Now, why? And the direct effect of this price increase would be reduction in the consumption. So that's also not good for the business. So if you increase the price, the consumption will go down. That's not good for the business. So why will producers stop using natural gas? If nobody is paying, and I know if I increase the price, my sales are going down. So I'll simply throw all the panels away and go back to natural gas and start producing at how much? 94 euro per megawatt hour, so that I keep my customer base intact. So just because it's nice, clean, green, that's nobody will do that, because at the end of the day somebody has to pay this 80 euro, 79 euro. So as I said, in business everything should be supported by business case. There must be a business case. It must make economic sense. So now here comes the way government is. So first of all, there is a global consensus between the academics, scientists, and they managed or they succeeded in convincing governments that this is a serious issue and something needs to be done. So government started to support or frame policies in a way that industry will move from carbon intensive energy sources to low carbon or zero carbon energy sources. So emission trading scheme is one example. We'll talk about this in a little bit detail. So at least in Europe, how it works, Dr. Kalpana, please feel free to interrupt and correct and add any time. She is also an expert on this. So what they do in Europe, or what they did for last 15 years, 20 years in Europe, is the government assigns certain number of CO2 emission allowance. So allowance means as a industry or as an operator, I'm allowed to emit X number of or let's say X tons of CO2 annually. So that's the allowance, right? Yeah. So, and how these allowances were let's say decided, how the amount of the CO2 was decided. That was decided based on the BAT, the best available technology. So, as an industrialist or operator, power plant operator, I am forced first of all to use the best available technology. That means increase the efficiency up to the maximum, so that CO2 emissions are already low. And then based on the countries, some industries were given allowances, that you are allowed to emit certain number of CO2 tons per year. Now if government says this is the amount or this is the number you are allowed to emit every year, CO2 emission will not come down. So what they will do, they will not increase their capacity, but they will also not reduce the CO2 emission. They will just continue as usual. So very nice, we have some allowances and we will emit this. We will not grow, or business will not grow, but we will also not die. So they will continue like this. So what governments decided is that they said the allowances will go down year by year. Right? So for an example, in Europe, the power industry do not get any allowance. So it doesn't mean that they are not allowed to operate. So they still operate, but they do not have any allowance. Means they are forced to do something with their CO2. So they have two choices: either continue their power plant, operation of their power plant, emit CO2, and in case face penalty. So penalties are somewhere around 130, 140 euros per ton. Or do CO2 sequestration, capture and sequestration. So that's the only two options they have. Or diversify to renewable power or some other energy sources. So I think in India also we have already seen the thermal power plants tenders are cancelled because the renewable power or the solar power price has gone down so much. No major power plant, thermal power plant is announced in last couple of years in India, even in India. So there is another reason we are blessed with the more solar. सूरज का बहुत आशीर्वाद है हम लोग को. So we are blessed with that. But yes, in Europe there are no allowances anymore for power industry because government thinks that there is an option for power production moving from coal to renewable. But there are some industry, there are no solutions, and cement is one of the examples. So as we were discussing earlier, cement is limestone. What could be the replacement of cement, if you can think about? If we say there is no cement today, from tomorrow, what could be the replacement? You can build your houses with the wood. That's also, let's say, going in the negative bad direction, but you could, there are some replacement, but for the houses, but not for the bridges. You cannot build bridges without cement. So cement is a good example of industries where absolutely there are no other choices available. Until unless they found a replacement for limestone. As long as you want to produce cement, you need limestone. As long as you are using limestone, you are releasing CO2. So there is no choice for. So these industries are called hard to abate industries. So electricity you can abate, removing, or let's say you stop using coal, natural gas and other carbon intensive fuels, to renewable power where you do not have any carbon in the chain. But cement is one, as I said, where you cannot do anything. So carbon capture is the only solution here. So in the earlier years of this ETC or ETS, what governments in Europe allowed is, for an example, as a company in Europe, I am given X tons of allowances, right? And I am releasing X plus 10. So I will have penalty on 10 tons normally in the normal case. But if I can prove that I have executed a project in China or in India or in Bangladesh or some other country, where I reduce CO2 emission by 10, then I will not have any penalty. Correct? That was the way early days of the ETS, European trading scheme. So CO2 avoided was allowed, but nowadays they have absolutely banned it also. So there is no matter how good you do in some other countries, how much CO2 you reduce by investing in projects in some other countries, your allowances will not be adjusted anymore. So in European countries, they are absolutely forced to do something, because in the early years, even today, I will not say that for India, but for other countries, efficiency is still very low for some sectors. So it's very easy. If I have to reduce, let's say, 10 tons of CO2, or my emissions by 10 tons of CO2, I simply go to a power plant or to an industry. I do a small project, a small investment, increase the efficiency, and suddenly I have, instead of 10, 20 tons less CO2. So earlier it was allowed, but now they simply stopped it. So there were many, or still there are many such schemes. And EU, the European Commission, they came up with this ETS, European ETS. It was launched in 2005, as we already discussed, to push industry going from low to zero carbon. So it's built upon the cap and trade mechanism. What it means is, I tell somebody you're allowed to only emit X number of tons of CO2. But let's say there are two companies in Europe. A is doing nothing and B is investing heavily on carbon capture. So they had an allowance of X tons, but now they are emitting only X minus 5. So what they can do, they can take these certificates or this allowance and sell it to somebody else. And somebody might decide, I'm not in the mood to invest in carbon capture, I'll just go and buy the certificates. So they buy these certificates, and with this, whatever difference additional CO2 they are emitting, they can show to the government or to EU that we bought this. It's just like instead of investing in their plant and capturing CO2 or reducing CO2 emission, you simply go to the market and buy these certificates and have your commitment done. So cap, as I said, cap on how much emission is allowed, traded in the open market like the stock market. And from 2005 till 2010, I think the cap was not decreasing. That was the phase 1 of EU ETS. But since 2010, this cap is slowly decreasing. As I said earlier, there are no allowances anymore for the power industry. Aviation industry allowance will be brought to zero in 2026. So they have to go from conventional ATF, aviation turbine fuel, to sustainable aviation fuel, or do something else, buy credits or pay penalties. We said some industry will continue to receive allowance, and cement is one example. There is no other way, and they go to the EU and say, we can't do anything. Either you give us either you finance heavily on research, that people, academic researchers can come up, scientists can come up with alternative materials, then as I said, those are, let's say, we normally call them hard to abate industry. It's not easy to do. So here try to explain this with an example. For example, if you are a power plant operator operating a 500 megawatt natural gas-based power plant, yearly you are producing 4,000 gigawatt hour of power, right? And with the number what we had earlier in mind, 470, that's the amount of CO2 you are releasing every year, right? In 2005, before the ETS. So suddenly ETS came in, and in 2010 they told you are allowed only 1.5 tons per hour. So now you have two options: either reduce the capacity of your power production or plant to maybe, I I don't know, 420, 430. So in the same ratio, 500 is for 1.8, 420 would be for 1.5, something like this. And then it's fine. But you have an installed capacity of 500 megawatt and you are producing only 420. That's not good. So if you have to make maximum use of your assets, whatever you have invested, or your power price. Otherwise, your power price will go up. Or you can go out to market and buy the certificates for 0.3 tons. You continue operating at 500 megawatt. You continue releasing at 1.8. And I have the allowances for 1.5. I go to the market, pay for these certificates for 0.3, and now I can show you that okay, 1.5 you allowed me, and for 0.3 these are the certificates. Right? Cost burden, but at least I can continue to operate at 500 megawatt. Right? Now in 2020 compared to 2010, it will be, so let's assume in 2010 the carbon price was, the certificate price was only $20 or 20 euro per ton. Today it's trading at somewhere around 70 euro per ton. And companies are expecting that this will go up to 150 or even 200 euro per ton by 2030. Because it's a typical supply demand thing. What EU is doing, they are closing the tap on allowances. So if there are no allowances, there are no certificates to trade, there is no demand, there is no supply, demand is very high, suddenly the price will go up. So that's what they are thinking, that the price will go up to 200, 150, 200 euro per ton by 2030. So in 2010, for our example, let's say the price was only 20 euro per ton, I also have to buy only for 0.3 because I have a huge amount of allowance. Now today what's happening, this is going down, 1.5 is going down, that means I have to buy for more. Slowly, the allowances given to industry is coming down. That means in the market it's very difficult to buy these certificates. So price is also going up and the amount of certificates I need to buy is also going up. So suddenly I had only, let's say, 6 here, 20 times 0.3, and if this 0.3 becomes 1 and this 20 becomes 100, I'm now at 100. So 6 to 100, 16 times more expensive. So that's the idea of the approach EU is following. Slowly dry up all the allowances from the market. With this the price will go up and the industry will be forced to do something. So it's going up and up and up, and there will be a point where it will not make any economic sense to operate a power plant within natural gas. So we saw in previous slides that for 1 megawatt hour it was somewhere around 80 euros. So if I have to pay for 1 megawatt hour electricity equivalent to CO2, if I have to pay more than 80, I will not do, because I have a solution. I'll simply shut down the plant and install the solar PVs. So at certain point they want to squeeze so much, governments, that at certain points industry will be forced to go from CO2 intensive sources to low or zero carbon energy sources. So offsetting in the initial years they allowed, because this was the transition phase, to avoid this knee-jerk. You cannot simply go and tell them stop doing what you are doing for the last 20 years. That's the, we call it business inertia. That's also personal inertia. There is a societal inertia. You really need to be convinced of change. Whatever you have been doing for years, in industry also, in the plant also, people are, no, I've been doing this for like this for 20 years. And so, allows industry, society to smoothly go. So this knee-jerk thing, what we talked about, carbon neutral to zero, and reducing greenhouse gases emission costs a lot. Offsetting allows to cover partly the costs. During 2005 to 2010 period, a lot of companies misuse it, this offsetting clause. So Now they came up with the airtight mechanism, really stopped awarding allowances for many industries. They removed the offsetting clause. Yeah, they're coming up with airtight mechanisms so that goals can be achieved. So that's basically the European ETS we talked about in phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. That was from 2005 to 2010, 2014, and we already entered the 4. And now EU is asking all the companies, the groups, to surrender their certificates what they earlier issued to them. So we talked about this many times. No international offsetting is allowed anymore. So there's also a political aspect on this side. What they are trying to do is also protect the European industries. Since China, we saw that last 20 years China has become the manufacturing hub of the world. So slowly European industry is also dying. So the level of research and innovation was going down, and with this they are trying to push back the innovation to EU and bring back the industrial manufacturing back to Europe. So there is some political aspect also of all those things. So as on all other fronts like solar, PV, hydrogen and other things, the Indians are also not far behind. We have our own trading mechanism. I think it's still not enforced or it's not in place, but that's the draft what I found or what I saw. So Paris Agreement we entered in 2016. We committed initially 35% reduction based on 2005 emission by 2030. I was telling earlier that it's a proud thing for us. We always revise our targets, but in the positive direction, not in the negative direction. So for 2030 we said 35%, we already revised it to 45%. So it's more or less based on European ETS. I have a link when we had the slides here. You can have the detail, you can have a detailed look on it. So compliance and offset. Compliance. Making a policy is one thing, but making people to comply to these policies is one thing. And there, reporting is one of the most important thing. And we have Dr. Kalpana here, and she is an expert on.
GRI reporting is compulsory in India.
Yeah.
GRI worldwide.
Yeah. So, if you do not have these reporting procedures, I'm just talking in layman language, without going into details. But if you do not have this standard approach or standards to report the greenhouse gas emissions, there is always a way, you can trick. No, my leakage is not an emission. My emission should be, what I'm trying to say is it's very easy for companies to make government fool, to report lower CO2 emissions or lower emissions than what they actually are doing. So that's why reporting is so important, and that's what the governments are doing. They are setting down or putting down all the reporting procedure, what needs to be accounted, what needs to be excluded. I think we are still in initial phase.
Scope and scope 2 is compulsory.
Sorry?
Scope and scope 2 is compulsory, not scope 3.
Not scope 3. So, but with this trading mechanism in India, we are
Carbon
still
trading is still yet to enforce. I mean, like just last year it has been announced.
Proposed and drafted.
Yeah, proposed. But not started yet.
Trading has not started, so it's still in initial phase.
Initial
To be watched how smooth and effective the scheme will be. But India has one advantage. We have a lot to learn from the European ETS. So I'm pretty sure this scheme will be much better than the ETS. Whatever mistake they did, we could learn and make our scheme much better. So we are talking till now, till here, till current thing. We already so far talked about how we can reduce CO2 emission. We go from coal to gas, and that's what you also can see in this graph. No, not probably here, because somewhere around 1970, 80, when this thing came up, slowly they moved to gas. It's also combined with the discovery of gas in the Middle East. So what we means world, the whole society has achieved so far. You could see how the coal was peaked here somewhere around 2012, 13. As I said, last 2-3 years, there are no thermal power plant announced, big thermal power plants announced here in India. Forget about the EU or Western world. So the coal is already going down. Target is to go zero by 2070. One can ask who will be emitting CO2 via coal, who will be using. So there are these Western countries, and there are developing nations like us. And there are also countries or continents like Africa. So it's difficult to convince those countries or bring them on board. So there will still be some emissions, continued emissions of CO2 via these things. Nuclear is an interesting case. So normally they say conventional and non-conventional energy sources. So conventional we say coal, oil, gas, and in non-conventional all these things comes around. Offshore, onshore, solar, hydro, nuclear also. But when we say renewable, poor nuclear is excluded, because although it's carbon free, because in nuclear you do not have any carbon CO2 emission. It's just the nuclear energy what you use to convert to thermal energy of steam and then generate electricity as you do in a typical coal-based power plant. But conventional, that's the difference between conventional, non-conventional. When we say non-conventional, we talk about all this, but when we say renewables, we only talk about these. Because nuclear, although it's zero carbon, it's unconventional, non-conventional, but it's not renewable. It will be finished one day. So that's one way. So solar absolutely exploded beyond 2020. You could see the biggest one. 2020 is really going high and high. So 2005, 2000 coal started to go down, replaced by gas fired. First of all, the gas going up, coal going down, clear decline of coal beyond 2050. Although the benefit of wind is similar to solar, but somehow the wind industry is left behind in this story. Solar has really exploded, but wind not the same way. We'll see in coming slides what are the issues with the wind industry, although it also generates clean power like solar. And nuclear shows sustained share due to the mixed opinion. Although it is considered the as clean energy source as solar, onshore, offshore. But now we come to the scope 1, 2, 3 emission. So with the solar, there are no scope 1. I'll define it later, but briefly speaking, solar 1 is scope 1 is the emission what you have within your battery limit or within your plant, direct CO2 emission. Scope 2 is related to all the utilities you produce, use electricity in your plant. So all the utility related CO2 emissions, those are the scope 2. And scope 3 is all the CO2 emissions associated with transportation or bringing all the feedstock to your plant. That's correct?
Yeah, upstream, downstream.
Upstream, downstream, all those. So within your plant, that's scope 1. Within your plant, all the utilities you use, that's scope 2. And beyond, everything else is scope 3.
What is in between oil fired and gas fired?
Green one.
No,
This one?
Blue, yeah.
This one?
Blue.
This is gas fired.
Oil burn.
Oil
This
fired.
one? This is hydro. You're talking about this one?
Yeah.
Yes.
Some thin
Just
line.
below the
thick
light
line.
green.
Yeah, below the green.
This one? This one?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
This is gas fire, no?
This.
Natural
Yes,
gas.
gas fire.
The purple.
I'm colorblind.
Okay. We will later.
Let's use this one. Coal?
Hmm.
Natural gas?
Ah. And then next one?
Yeah, next one I also do not remember.
Cool.
Oil fire.
Oil fire.
Oil fire. Yes. Oil fire. This one is nuclear. Yeah. Hydro, solar, and then onshore, offshore. So yes, society is making progress beyond 2020. You see, solar. I was talking about the nuclear. So there is a mixed opinion for nuclear. After this disaster in Japan, people suddenly started talking about, oh, it's all very clean, but we don't want to do anything with nuclear. So that's the apprehension people have with the nuclear, although it's very clean. But then there are some other countries, even within the EU, there are countries like Germany who have already stopped their last nuclear plant. But just across the border in France, they have their power, almost 50% of power is coming from nuclear. And they say we will continue to do so. So it's a mixed opinion, even in the similar, let's say, society where they have alignment on most of the issues. But on this issue, there are still a lot of differences in opinions. So that's an interesting case. And in India, I think we are going nuclear as much as possible. So there are big plans for us to install nuclear power. Okay. Yeah, let's try to do the same, take the same example and do some calculations here. So you use your carbon intensive energy source, produce electricity, and then you release CO2 to atmosphere. And that's the one similar if you have coal base, and if you go to natural gas, you take air, you burn it, you generate steam, and you produce electricity. So scope 1, 2, 3, we already said. Going back to this example, for 500 megawatt power plant, you have only 1.8 million tons of CO2 per year. That's my scope 1. But during this process, I use a lot of cooling water, and this cooling water is not the cooling water, the river water what I'm taking. Even if I'm taking river water, I have to pump it. So I'm using some electricity. So generally, you have to put in a lot of power to produce the cooling water. So all the CO2 emission
cooling tower.
is coming from cooling tower, for example, and you need power to run your fans. So a lot of electricity goes in, and this electricity is also generated somewhere in the coal-based power plant, and there you are also releasing CO2. So you are not releasing CO2 only this one within your plant, this 1.8, but somewhere else also. So scope 1 is the CO2 what we are releasing in our plant, and scope 2 would be all the CO2 which is related to the utility,
Indirect emission.
indirect emission, but related to utility, used within the plant. Now if I go back, as you were saying, a lot of emissions or let's say energy used to transport this energy, natural gas. So anything beyond, as you said, beyond your plant, everything is scope 3. So
that is also indirect.
that's also indirect. Yeah. So if we when we are doing calculation in earlier slides, what's my coal? I burn this much coal. That's my LHV. That's my carbon molecular weight. That's the CO2. But actually, it's not only this CO2, but it's a lot of other sources of CO2 emission. So that's what they define it as scope 1, 2, 3. And if you wouldn't take into account all of this, we'll report 1.8. But actually, it's 1.8, 0.15, 0.5 based on some assumptions. So my total scope 1, 2, 3 emission would be, would be 2.45 instead of 1.8. Now the CO2 footprint, I think this we already did, but let's take another example and then try to implement these calculations to calculate CO2 footprint. We did it for the power production, natural gas base, it's around 470 kg per megawatt of per kilowatt hour of electricity. But that was for the electricity. How we do it for the products. Right? So let's take an example of producing hydrogen, conventional way of producing hydrogen from natural gas. So you have steam methane reforming. We'll be spending 1.5 hours only on this part tomorrow. But those are the three basic equations: steam methane reforming, and shift reaction, water gas shift reaction, and the direct reforming. Altogether, without going into detailed calculations also, we start with natural gas, we end up somewhere producing 70% hydrogen, and the remaining goes to CO and CO2. Right? So basically what we are doing, we are producing 6.6 kg of hydrogen, 8.7 kg of CO, and CO2 is let's say unwanted product. Now, once it was very easy to allocate your CO2 emissions if you have only one product. What I want to show here is, if you have two products, how you will allocate your CO2. I can go in the market and say, whatever CO2 is released, I say it's with the hydrogen, or I will simply say 6.6 divided. I think I have it on another slide. Yeah. So what I will do, I can say 6.6 divided by 45.6. That's my CO2 footprint for hydrogen. But actually, I am producing CO also, carbon monoxide. So generally, SMR plants, they produce sometimes pure hydrogen, but if you have a customer for carbon monoxide offtake, they also produce CO. So without doing this CO shift reaction. So how do you allocate your total CO2 to your two products? So one way, normally, specific heat, I remember, the specific heat of each component. If you have a mixture, how you will calculate the specific heat of this mixture? We simply do it with the mass composition. Mass composition. But can we do that here? We can say we have 6.6 plus 8.7, which is how much? 15.3 kg, so 6.6 divided 15.3, which is 42%. So I say 42% of my CO2 is for hydrogen and remaining is for CO. But that's not the way, because energy you put in is going to end up in hydrogen and CO based on the energy. So that's the way, that's the actual way of allocating your CO2 footprint if you have more products. So you look at what's the energy content of your product, and based on this, like we are doing, we are saying we do with the CP specific heat based on mass composition. Here you do that based on energy composition. So you say, this is my total energy out, that's 6.6 times 120, that's the LHV of hydrogen, that's the LHV of CO. So almost, how much is this? Maybe 90%, if I'm not wrong, yeah, 85, 90%. So 90% of my energy is going here. But weight wise, this is 42%. So if I do based on the weight, I will say 42% of my CO2 is with hydrogen, associated with hydrogen. But in reality, 90% of my CO2 is allocated to hydrogen. So that's the way you report for CO2 footprint if you have more than one product. Is that correct, Dr. Kalpana?
Yeah. In India, we do carbon footprint, CO2.
Carbon footprint, yeah. So I wanted to be very specific. Actually,
Yeah.
carbon is CO2.
It's India, it's
Yeah.
carbon footprint, carbon market, carbon trading.
Yeah.
It's all about.
Yeah, that's all about carbon. Which is actually true because
Yeah, but we use the unit of tons of CO2.
tons of CO2, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. We
Yes.
all calculate in terms of
Tons of
CO2
CO2.
ultimately.
Here I wanted to keep it simple,
Yeah. That's
related with the calculations,
Exactly.
stoichiometric calculations.
Ultimately, we go for tons of CO2 only.
So that's how we will report. For the hydrogen, I have this 90% energy. So I will say that's the kg of CO2. That was my total CO2. So 0.9 multiplied by this. That's my CO2. Let's say footprint of my hydrogen product. And that's for my CO product. So sometimes you also you assign one as your main product and another one as a byproduct. So for the byproduct, you can also say your CO2 footprint in terms of main product also. So you can say CO2 footprint of my CO production of carbon monoxide is 0.7 kg CO2 per kg hydrogen. But you have to be very specific. Or you simply say 0.5 kg CO2 per kg product, which is CO. So, as I said, we'll look in this hydrogen manufacturing process tomorrow in detail. But generally, a SMR plant will also produce a lot of steam because SMR is an energy-intensive process. So you have a lot of waste energy, and even after doing a lot of heat integration, you will not be able to use all the energy within your process. You end up producing some steam, some byproduction of steam. So let's extend the same example to the next level. We stop here. I think I had only two slides. Shall I?
Okay.
Just 2 slides. I requested and Dr. Shinde agreed. Sorry, between you guys. Yeah, but basically, let's assume if you have 19 kg of steam, but if you apply the same principle, steam has no heating value because it's not a fuel. If you cannot burn steam, so we cannot apply the same methodology if you have steam, but still there is some energy going into the steam. So for such scenarios, for steam, what we do is normally we see for the H2 and CO we took the LHV, and for steam we take the enthalpy. So with this we say this much energy is going to H2, this much energy is going to CO, and this much energy is going to